Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the Nordic Football Podcast. My name is Jonathan Faduba, and I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Steve Wiss. Steve, we're back for another week's episode. How are you today?
Jonathan, it's good to be with you, as always, my friends. I'm doing well, international breaks been and gone. Recharged my batteries a bit, and we're into this October period of four match days in a row, and looking forward to it. I hope you're doing well.
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. And you sound incredibly chirpy. So considering Leeds United lost, you sound very upbeat. We'll move on from that little dig at you. We've got a really bumper show today for you guys. A huge amount of talking points. Obviously, hopefully you tuned into our last episode. We had an exclusive interview with Mohamed Said, the striker at IK Sirius. Had some really interesting insights from Mr. Said about Swedish football, growing up in Sweden, and playing in the Premier League as well as a young player, and gave us a lot of advice as well. And he talked about Sirius's incredible season. So don't forget to obviously subscribe and go back in the archives if you want to listen to that. But yeah, today we have got a lot to get through, and we're going to start in Norway. And there's plenty to talk about. We're going to talk about Molde. We're going to talk about Mjøndalen and Brann. We're going to talk about Christiansen Rosenborg. We're going to talk about Viking. We're going to talk about some ugly incidents that have taken place in Norway this weekend. And we're also going to preview the upcoming Europa League game between Dundalk from Ireland and Molde, who meet in the Europa League side as Molde look to represent for Norway in Europe. We'll then move on to part two, and we'll talk about Sweden. A huge game between Djurgården, the champions, and Malmö, the top of the table side. That was a game that seriously had a riveting end to it, and we'll talk about that in part two. And we'll also talk about the title race there in Sweden and what's going on. There's been a big talent being scouted by Manchester United in Sweden as well. We'll talk about that. And we'll also look at the bottom of the table. And a couple of transfers have taken place out of Sweden as well, which we'll dig into. So stay tuned, get yourself ready, put the kettle on, or, get your popcorn or whatever, your beer, whatever you want to accompany you with this show. And I hope you will enjoy it. Steve, we're going to get straight into it with Norway. The unbeaten run is over, isn't it? It's the end of Bodø Glimt's fantastic run. They nearly got through a whole season unbeaten. We talked about them so much on this podcast this season. But they came up against Molde this past weekend, and it was a crazy game, wasn't it?
Yeah, just to go back to the Leeds result that you mentioned there, just to actually be back in the Premier League on Monday Night Football, that's enough to put a smile on my face, Jonathan. It was a long wait. But yes, Molde for Bodø Glimt 2. And this match was pretty much as I expected it to go. And I think a lot of people expected it to go. Bodø Glimt it's probably the one match this year they've had bad team news for. Obviously, they sold Jens Petter Hauge to AC Milan a few weeks ago, but there was injuries to Philip Zinkernagel. There was Sondre Fett was out. Alphonse Samsted was ruled out as well. They had a suspension in defence. The team just seemed a little bit on the lightweight side, really, Jonathan. And it was probably the wrong time to take on Molde, who, pound for pound, still maybe have the best squad in the league now that Jens Petter Hauge's gone. They can more than match Glimt on their day. And Glimt actually took the lead. It was a really good individual goal from a youngster to keep your eye on. Sebastian Tunekti, 18-year-old sort of winger, playmaker in the final third. And he looks like he's got a really good future with the goal he scored. But Molde, in the end, just showed their extra attacking qualities. Magnus Wolf Eikram was in really good form. He raises it on the big occasion, I think, Magnus Wolf Eikram. He's the best player in the league for my money when he's in the mood, and he was in the mood here. He was very creative, and Glimt just didn't quite look their own selves, and it was a deserved win for Molde, but Glimt didn't disgrace themselves. They pulled it back to 4-2, could have gone back to 4-3, and who knows what would have happened there, but it was an exciting top-of-the-table clash. Bodø Glimt are still they're 16 points clear of the top now, so they're still very well situated, but deserved win for Molde.
It's good to hear. And I'm sorry, just tucking into a bit of carrot cake actually while listening to you. So
you're not going all vegan on me, are you?
I've got my cup of tea and I've got a nice slice of carrot cake. Are they missing Patrick Berg then? Are they missing Jens Petter Hauge then, Steve?
Of course, look, they would. Any team would miss someone of his quality. He's been one of the best players in the league this year. But when you actually factor in Philip Zinkernagel was missing as well, God knows how many goals and assists they've had between them this year. You can understand it, can't you? And away against perhaps the toughest opposition they can have. It just all things came into one, and things were against them, and they were going to lose eventually. And the good news is, like I said, they're 16 points clear at the top. They only need another 12 points now to win the title. So they actually didn't lose too much ground because Rosenborg dropped points. That's 4 wins. That's all they need, and they are the champions of Norway. And they've still got some very favourable fixtures, even if they kind of just go off the rails a bit. They've got Mjøndalen at home, they've got Ålesund at home, and Ålesund are absolutely bloody awful. I've not got them down. We need to mention them actually. They're not on our list here, but Ålesund was shocking. But they've got favourable fixtures. Bodø Glimt, I'm pretty sure they'll have a nice end to the year. But yeah, I enjoyed watching this game. It was exciting. What Norwegian football's all about, really.
Fantastic stuff, yeah. And that's the first time that Bodø Glimt have lost a game since December the 1st, 2019, which is quite incredible, really, isn't it? Nearly managed to go a whole calendar year without a defeat, just about. Didn't do it, but they're still on course for the title, which would be a historic occasion for the club. So, as things go, one defeat in 21 games isn't so bad. Their manager came out post-match, Kjetil Knutsen, and said, we let in 4 easy goals, and he wasn't too happy with the defensive performance. But, looking ahead towards, the end of the season, they're still in a good place, aren't they, Steve?
Very good place. And, they'll have players coming back from injury, suspension coming up soon. And, I would expect... I think there might be the odd hiccup going forwards again. It's just the way it is now. I wouldn't worry too much about them. Molde are a good side, and Molde may well go on to actually claim the silver medal as long as the Europa League campaign doesn't sort of distract them too much. So they had a bit of a hiccup, Molde. I think they may be over it now. It was a good performance.
Yeah, and the next 3 games are Mjøndalen, Kristiansand, and Ålesund. So 3 teams that you'd expect them to probably win. And, by that time, they could even be champions, couldn't they?
Yeah, they could. And, Rosenborg were the nearest to them going into the round. Now Molde have moved to second place. That's just presuming Molde, just to get to the amount of points Bodø Glimt have now, they've got to get 16 points, which is 5 wins and a draw. And there's only 9 games left. So it's not even... It may be feasible that they just need like a couple more wins to win the title. That's how dominant they've been in the first 20 rounds. And it is nothing to worry about at all. Really, I think they're going to get over the finishing line and in style. There were still some very positive things from the Bodø Glimt performance, but it just happened to be. He's right, the manager. They did concede some soft goals. The goalkeeper probably was at fault for a couple of them, and that's probably an area he has had some impressive games. The goalkeeper Kaikin, especially AC Milan away, but. It's probably an area that they can look to upgrade in the off season, get themselves a really classy keeper. Kaikin's not bad, and the backup's not bad either, Joshua Smith. But maybe they could really upgrade it just to a different level.
Fantastic stuff. We'll move on. We just mentioned there that Bodø Glimt will be playing Mjøndalen in one of their upcoming games, which ordinarily you'd think would be a simple win for them, but. After 6 straight defeats, Mjøndalen have turned up something for the books, didn't they, Steve? They managed to pull off a shock win against Brann this weekend.
Well, obviously, Mjøndalen came under some criticism from this podcast in a recent episode. And we do. I know their manager, Vegard Hansen, does sometimes listen to our episodes. He was a guest on the show last year. And he likes a bit of the Nordic Football Podcast. And, I was critical in that I was saying in the games that are winnable, at least be positive. And you know what? I really was quite happy with what I saw from Mjøndalen against Brann. I think they sensed that they were facing a bit of a wounded beast who not in a confident way. And they took the bull by the horns. They got themselves an early goal. And, instead of just sitting back and parking the bus, they actually were looking for the second goal. They were looking for the third goal as well in the second half. At the same time, they were still not taking too many risks defensively, but it was a lot more positive on the front foot. They wanted it more. Brann are a bit of a mess, I must add that right now, but Mjøndalen took their chance. They sensed an opportunity, and I think the 2-week break has done the manager really, really good. And I mentioned before, he tends to get the most out of his squad. I think they fell into a bit of a negative rut where they kind of went away from some of the good things they did last year. But this is good. They also tend to have a really good record against Brann. They really are their bête noire, as you might say in French. Brann absolutely hate facing Mjøndalen, and they something about this fixture they don't like. But I think really fair play to Mjøndalen. I was really pleased actually to see them take the bull by the horns. And there's still life in them yet. They're not going to give up. They're only 2 points behind the relegation playoff spot. A couple more wins, and who knows? But very encouraging for them, not very good for Brann.
I mean, he's not been in touch with you, has he, Vigard Hansen, about your comments?
Hey, we have had the occasional message in the last 12 months, but, I didn't want to distract him recently, but if he was listening, then maybe he took the hint, as you might say. But he's a good manager. He would have realised the mistakes that they've been making. They had some tough fixtures as well. But I think what was disappointing, as I said before, in the winnable games like Sandefjord, Sarpsborg, they were too negative. Turn that around immediately. You could just tell there was something about them in this game. They were up for it. They wanted to attack more, and instead of they took the lead in a couple of games, and they just couldn't hang on because they were trying to park the bus too early. This was a much better approach, a much more measured tactical approach, and they game managed really well in the second half.
Yeah, and he's going to have to keep that momentum going because the next 2 games are Bodø away and Molde at home. So really, really tough 2 fixtures coming. I mean, what's your outlook for them, Steve? Can they survive?
Well, look, the thing with Mjøndalen is that you never know when they're beaten, and them 2 fixtures now, getting them out of the way now might not be the worst thing, because after that they will have winnable games, that's for sure. I think they've definitely got to play Allsvenskan at home, for example, at some stage. I think they might have Start on their list too. So you've got to win those games around you. But hey, this is the team that went to Bodø last year and got a 0-0 draw. And they tend to actually play the big teams quite close. They're never disgraced in those games. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility. They could even sneak something. I mean, I don't think they will. But at least they've got a victory that's going to ease their sort of pressure on them, and almost got a free hit now at those 2 games.
Yeah, and their website has put a very simple message after that match. We've beaten Brann again. They complete the double on Brann and give themselves a lifeline. 6 points behind, but we'll see if they can do it with 2 huge games coming up. Steve, let's move on. I want to talk about Christiansen and Rosenborg. You've got a few comments about that, haven't you? I
do, because this was a game I was really looking forward to watching this game. I mean, generally, Christiansen are fantastic to watch. There's a lot of goals involved in their games. Rosenborg, well, you never quite know what you're going to get with them, but by and large, I expected a thriller, really. But amazingly, both fixtures between the 2 teams have ended 0-0 this year, which, I mean, there's not been many 0-0s full stop in the Eliteserien in 2020. So for this fixture to end 0-0 twice, I'm a bit baffled because, I mean, the first 0-0 was right at the start of the season when Ari Corneland was in charge of Rosenborg. Teams were a little bit rusty, so I could understand that. But this was a strange one. It generally deserved to end 0-0. I can't think of a major chance in this match, which is staggering. There were some saves from the keepers, but they were long-range shots. I just don't know what happened. I expected... I say a lot of action, a lot of goalmouth action, but both teams defended well. Rosenborg especially, I think, were surprisingly good defensive. And I've got a few comments to make about a new signing of theirs. Holmar Elleofsson, an Icelandic international. He looks really solid, actually. 30-year-old. He does start for the national team. He just seemed to be everywhere. He was cutting out all the crosses. He was heading when he needed to. He was also bringing the ball out of defence, like really good sort of technical control. He looks like a really good addition. It was his third start since joining the club during the most recent transfer window, and he looked the business. And Tore Reginiussen, the old dog, he had a really solid game as well. For me, those were the two best players on the park for Rosenborg in this game, and it bodes well for them going forwards. But I was surprised because both played in their international break for their respective countries. So I didn't expect they would have much in their tank, but maybe Rosenborg going forward are going to have a bit more solid now with that pairing. The new left-back, Parkanate, he's probably the weak link now at left-back, but he will offer a bit more for them going forward. But, really solid performance. And Kristiansund, to be fair to them, they didn't put a foot wrong defensively either. And, their manager came up with a good game plan. And it was just a surprising result. The way the game panned out. I mean, you can sometimes get a really good 0-0, can't you, where there's end-to-end entertainment, action and chances. But this did exactly what it said on the tin. It was like watching, a French League 2 game in terms of major chances created.
Alga Harada is the manager of Rosenborg now. He's been in charge since September. How's he getting on? I mean, he's played 8, won 5, drawn 2, lost 1. Big name. He's someone who's won titles in Sweden, of course. Norwegian manager, but he's won the league with Malmö, for example, and Helsingborg. And also played at Manchester City as a player in his career. What's your analysis of him? Because you were quite critical of the last manager, and I did see a tweet actually, by the way, about this game. You weren't very happy about it on Twitter either. What's your analysis of Rosenborg's manager at present, to date?
Well, he's actually unbeaten domestically since he came in. Every time, the amount of times I've seen him on the sideline shaking his head in bewilderment. Actually, even in this game, I think he's been surprised by some of the mistakes that they made, but he's done well. He always seems to find a way actually to get a result out of this team. But generally matches have been quite frantic and disorganised since he's come in, and I don't blame him for that. I think that's a build-up of things that have been going wrong here the last 2 or 3 years. That was the first real time I could just sense there was maybe a 2-week game plan. This idea of being a bit more solid than normal rather than the frantic nature of things. And that might be something going forward that they miss. Based on that, there's not many good defences in the league at all at the moment. This whole season, there's not many good defences. So if they can somehow get themselves keeping clean sheets and be more reliable at the back, they could become the dominant defensive force in the Eliteserien if they continue that sort of thing. I think he signed well. Elleofsson is a good signing. Marcus Henriksen looks like a good signing, and he's using Dino Islamovic quite well up front. He's an experienced gaffer, isn't he? He knows what he's doing, and he commands respect as well within the teams, the squad. So I think it's positive for Rosenborg going forward. They've got a canny sort of old fox who knows what he's doing in a lot of different ways, tactically and in the transfer market.
Yeah, and you mentioned the transfer market. They're about to sign one of Djurgården's top players, Jonathan Augustinsson. There's big rumours that he's going to leave Djurgården this winter to join Rosenborg, and of course that's probably partly to do with the manager because he's got good connections in Sweden.
He's a left back.
He's a left back, yeah. And of course, the manager of Rosenborg has also managed Norway and Denmark. So that, like you said, wily old fox, someone who's been around the block, and maybe it's positive times for Rosenborg.
I think so. I mean, I did mention there that the new left back they signed, Parkanate, looks like the weak link in the back line right now in terms of defence. So if they could get this guy in from Djurgården and have Kanate as a backup or rotation option, they really could become quite formidable in the long term, certainly heading into next season, and that would serve them well. Like I said, there's not many good defences in Norway at the moment. A team just playing really wide open football. So if they could sort of become an exception to the rule, I mean, look, one swallow doesn't make a summer, does it? But I was impressed how they shut down Armel Pellegrino. Pellegrino's been tearing apart nearly every team this season, but they did a job on him really. There was one time he got away, and Eliofsson just recovered magnificently. I was impressed that he shut down him, and Christiansen didn't really have an answer. You know, they didn't have an answer. I was impressed with Rosenborg.
Yeah, and we may well see actually more movement between Sweden and Norway from Sweden to Rosenborg, because Mikael Dawson is their sporting director as well at Rosenborg. So Augustinsson, you mentioned, he's a left back, 24 years old. Parkonate was formerly at Malmö. He used to be a left back at Malmö as well, and kind of went off the rails a little bit. You know, moved to Italy and it didn't quite work out. So what you say there seems like maybe he's not quite progressed. It's been a tough sort of time for him, I think, because he was quite good at Malmö at times. But Augustinsson, a solid player, and it looks like potentially a strong reinforcement there. We'll move on. And you did mention Amahl Pellegrino, and we need to sort of talk about this incident, don't we, Steve? Because there's been a few unsavoury incidents in Norway this past couple of weeks, which probably bears worth commenting on this podcast.
I think so, unfortunately, Jonathan. I mean, there's been some racist incidents. We'll start with Olsson against Christiansen, where a section of a minority section of the crowd in Olsson were tearing into Amahl Pellegrino using racism, and basically it sparked a bit of an outcry. Domestically there up in Norway, campaign, Stop Racism campaign. A lot of stuff was said about it. A real emphasis, to be honest, around the whole world around that sort of thing at the moment, isn't there? But it was something specifically in Norway. And a big campaign. There was in the build up to this particular round of matches, I saw a lot of it advertising and all together with this against the racism, etc. And therefore, it was quite shocking to hear. I didn't actually watch the game. I watched the 5 p.m. kickoffs and had a bit of a break in the evening. I didn't watch Sandefjord Vålerenga, but the Vålerenga brought on a player, Usman Kamara, and unfortunately a steward at Sandefjord basically called him an effing monkey, and this steward, it's a bit of a shock, had been at the club for 5 years, and the sporting director of Sandefjord, Bugge Pettersen, was shocked. Apparently, according to him, there were several who reacted with surprise that it was precisely this person who was behind the racist chant. Afterwards, the steward had been waiting for the security chief, and he packed down his vest and he realised he had sealed his fate, and that was going to be the end of him. And apparently they thanked him for a period of 5 years until today, said the sporting director. So it sounds like a guy who for 5 years was as right as rain, and then suddenly just, I don't know, went rogue. Maybe he showed his true colours. Who knows, Jonathan? And maybe it was hidden underneath him for this long. But it's absolutely sickening to hear of this incident. No, he can't be calling anyone that at all. There's no place for it. And it was really sad, actually, to see the guy, Usman Kamara, the player himself, actually post on Instagram. And this kind of got to me a little bit, actually. No one is born hating another person because of the colour of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they must be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. Nelson Mandela, thanks for your support. And it really was quite a moving message on Instagram there. I'm sure you saw that one as well. And I was appalled to hear. Why would someone even think about doing that on a weekend where they're actually trying to promote this anti-racism? I can't believe it. I really can't. And it's very disappointing. But it's good to see Sandefjord immediately have banned this steward for life. He will never be setting foot in that stadium again. And I'd imagine I would hope he'd probably be banned from all stadiums in Norway because there's absolutely no excuse for it.
Yeah, and it has caused quite a sort of stir in Norway, hasn't it? Because generally speaking, it's considered sort of quite a tolerant country. I have to say I was quite surprised and quite shocked by it.
Yeah.
There's been sort of positive reaction from the clubs in Norway, haven't they? In Eliteserien, they've all posted on social media and they've all kind of supported the players involved, haven't they?
Yeah, a lot of support, and you would expect that as well, because I mean, like I say, I was shocked when I heard about the Ålesund Christiansen game. I'd never really heard of any of these incidents prior to this. I'm not out there, so I don't know. Maybe this sort of stuff was sort of being brushed under the carpet. I doubt it, though. It felt like an isolated incident. So I just can't believe a steward of all people, goes and says that to an opposition player or any person in the stadiums. It's a very good reaction, though. I think everyone's together in Norway surrounding the racism or anything along that regard. Religion, like he said there, or sexuality. There's we're in a world where I've said it before, even on this podcast. There's almost too much hate out there, and it's good to see people uniting again and coming at this, because we cannot be tolerant of this sort of thing in society anymore. We just can't. It's absolutely pathetic.
Yeah, and has there been a lot of support for Kamara as well? I think players have rallied behind him, but it sounds like has he got the support he needed?
Yeah, I think so. A lot of the Vålerenga players after the game, they won the match 3-0, but a lot of the players said there's a really good quote. I'm trying to find it again, but they said they won the match, but they didn't win the thing that mattered. And it was obviously they were very disappointed about what the incident from the crowd. Jonathan Tullis Nation said delighted with the 3 points, but we lost the most important match today, which was the fight against racism. And I think there was a lot of support around the player. It's obviously not a nice thing for him to have to come through. They'd be thinking, why him? He's a nice lad, fairly young, I do believe. He's only 20, 21-year-old, and he came on in the 90th minute as well. So it's not like he was on the field long. And you would not expect it. But a really good reaction from everyone with Norway, and I think I expect this campaign against the racism or any sort of things like that to continue, and let's stamp it out now. If it's out there, let's expose these people and straight away.
Yeah, and I think to wrap up this section, I'd probably say the Nordic Football Podcast would want to come out and support both players affected, Amar Pellegrino and Usman Kamara. And, we also would want to say publicly on the Nordic Football Podcast, there's no place for this kind of discrimination in any way, shape or form, obviously, and we reject it. And obviously we stand fully behind the campaign to sort of support these players. The one thing I found quite encouraging was the comments from at Sandefjord's general manager, Espen Bugge Pettersen. He came out and said, we're crystal clear on what kind of consequence there must be for this. This person will not be allowed to enter our stadium or arena ever again, neither as a guard or a spectator, he said. And he said that, afterwards he was shipped out of the stadium and that will be it. We thanked him for good service over a 5-year period, and it ends today, which I think was very sort of proactive, showed good leadership. And I think that's what you want to see, isn't it? As soon as you see it, it's stamped out immediately. He won't be back at that stadium. And hopefully he's got a lot of time on match days now to think about what he's done, because he's lost his job. But yeah, like I say, we're very tolerant on this podcast, and at the end of the day, I think there's just no room for it. And maybe it's been because it's in the spotlight at the moment. Maybe you get people wanting to be a bit rebellious, maybe, or maybe they've been hiding these views and they want to come out with it. But yeah, it's totally unacceptable. And as a multicultural podcast ourselves, Steve, I think it's fair enough to say that we get on fine. So it's ridiculous, really, isn't it? And it's quite sad that we always have to seem to be talking about it quite a lot in football these days. But let's move on, and we're going to talk now about the Europa League football, aren't we? I mean, there have been the Corona cases, which I'll come to in a second, but I think we can lead on to that via this discussion about the Europa League, which is huge. And our only representative in Europe this season is Molde, and they're going to be facing the Irish team Dundalk this week. So take it away, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting group. It's Dundalk, Arsenal, Rapid Vienna, and Molde. And Molde start off with a trip to Ireland on Thursday, roughly 6 o'clock kickoff, I think. And I think we had a question come in. Is this one of the best chances for a Norwegian team to make it out of the groups in a while? And it possibly is. Arsenal, you would expect to win this group, but then you look at the other teams, Dundalk and Rapid Vienna, and Molde have got to think they can compete with both those clubs. Now, this first trip to Ireland, they've got to be looking at getting 6 points out of the Irish, I think. Rapid Vienna, I can't say I know too much about them, But again, it doesn't seem like the sort of team that they should be fearing. I don't think it'll be easy against Dundalk. They're quite an experienced team in Europe, actually. They even made the group stages of this competition just a few years ago, I do believe. And, the sort of players that are going to be bang up for it. They went out there to Sheriff in Moldova, is it, to Tiraspol, and they managed to get through a qualifying match on its own on penalties. And that shows big heart, doesn't it? And they've got something about them. So, this is a match Molde have got to go there and they've got to try and win, though. A draw is not enough if they want to get out of this group. I'm not exactly sure what Molde's expectations are, but they want to give it a good go. And there's a positive that normally the last two rounds of the group stage are when the Norwegian league is finished, right? Or the teams involved have finished anyway. And you can get what's called, they get quite cold, and just rustiness sets in at the end of the season. But this time, obviously, with the extension of the Norwegian league itself, then it runs all the way through into mid-December. So they might not have the same problem in Europe as normal.
Yeah, well, the game will take place in Ireland. And the rules this season are, in terms of European competition, there's 600 fans allowed, 2 games maximum. So that would be the capacity. I don't know. Molde have said on their website that season ticket holders only can apply for the game and can get tickets to the game. Not entirely sure what the rules are in Ireland, but I'm sure it probably is similar. Here's just something I want to tell the listeners, just to give a bit of context about the group that we've got here. The transfer market value of the squad, of each squad in this Europa League Group B. Arsenal's transfer market value, 631.95 million euros. Rapid Vienna transfer market value, that's the value of their squad combined in terms of their, what they would be worth on the market today. Rapid Vienna, 33.65 million, so a good 600 million less than Arsenal. And then in third place, we've got Molde, repping from Norway, 13.25 million squad value, 13.25 million euros. And then finally, Tiny Dundalk, 2.23 million euros squad value. So this is a group, really, isn't it, of huge extremes, really, in terms of financial power and might. Molde usually are kind of minnows, aren't they? Especially on the European stage. But this is maybe a team that's even smaller. Nearly 10 times, 5 times smaller than Molde in terms of squad value. What are the expectations for Molde this season in the Europa League? And how are they looking at this?
I think there's an expectation. They would expect to finish certainly above Dundalk. And I think most would expect Arsenal to win the group probably with a 100% record, right? Unless, it's interesting the way the fixtures go for Molde. They go to Ireland, then they're at home to Rapid Vienna, then it's a double header against Arsenal, home against Dundalk, and the last game is in Austria. Now, that might not be too bad. There's not beyond the realms of possibility they win the first 2 games. And then they can sort of go into the Arsenal match with almost like a free hit, if you know what I mean. And if they got something out of either of those fixtures, then fair play to them. And before the final 2 games, which are quite winnable again. And that kind of works out for them. Like, if you face Arsenal first up and you get battered, you're in a negative mindset for the group, aren't you? So this kind of works out for them. Molde are an interesting side. I did an article on the Wyscout, the Wyscout blog on this. If people are interested in knowing a bit more about them, then take a look at that article. I'm sure a lot of those teams may be interested in it, Jonathan. There's some. I might be giving away a few too many secrets on Molde in that, so I apologise to them in advance. But this is a group that got a chance, and it might come down to margins. I don't think the Irish will be pushovers, like I said, by any means at all. So I could see them even taking points off Rapid Vienna. It's going to be a real rat race to finish second in this group.
Yeah, and on that note, we have a partnership with Wyscout, as regular listeners will be familiar with by now. If you're not a regular listener, then there you go. We have a partnership with Wyscout. We produce regular content for their website. And Steve, you've done quite a nice blog on them this month, Getting Back to Glory, how Molde can turn their season around. And it takes a deep dive into Molde and what's been going wrong this season under Erling Moe. And in fairness to them, as soon as you've written that article, they've won against Bodø Glimt. So, maybe you're a lucky omen for them. But yeah, they're the defending champions, of course. They might be outgoing champions, but they are the reigning champions. Do you think they'll qualify? Maybe in a word, or a sentence?
Do you know what? I'm going to actually have some faith in them and say yes, because they've impressed me in Europe in the last 2 years in certain matches. And now I think the group stage will suit them. They've always kind of fallen at the final hurdle in terms of these two-legged matches on penalties or something like a one goal. The group stage can give them a little bit less pressure, I think. And, they're starting to play well again. The players are starting to return from fitness, the injuries they had. I think Molde can do it. But I don't know too much about Rapid Vienna, so they could be the bit of the wild card.
Yeah, just a few tidbits from your blog. You've mentioned that Molde's possession has gone up from 54.4% ball possession to 56% this season. Their expected goals per 90 has also risen from 1.98 to 2.0. It's a small marginal increases. It'll be tough. Obviously, Rapid Vienna, the Austrian side, we may be featuring some guests as the weeks go on in that group and talking about them. But if you do want to have any suggestions in terms of our coverage of Europe this season, then feel free to let us know, and we'll be keeping a close eye on Molde. And don't forget to hit on YScout on Twitter @YScout and check out that blog if you haven't seen it already. A really nice analysis from Steve there. I mentioned obviously lack of fans, or the limit of sort of 600 fans, and you wanted to talk about the international break has come back, and we've got a few COVID cases, haven't we, in Norway? Before we move on to part 2.
Yeah, this is Berisha came back to Viking, tested positive, and because he was in obviously contact with the rest of the Viking squad before this happened, then the rules state that the whole squad had to be pretty much in isolation for 2 weeks. Now, it's not like it is in England where if you play, the matches still go ahead and stuff. And France, I mean, there was a match in France, I think Dunkirk, 10 players tested positive and the match still went ahead. In Norway, it's a lot stricter, and it meant the Vikings' next 2 fixtures had to be postponed. So their trip, they're now playing against Haugesund on Tuesday, the 27th of October. That match was originally scheduled for the 25th, so it just goes 2 days later. And then the match that was called off this weekend against Odd, that is now getting played on Wednesday, the 4th of November. So for those interested in fantasy football, you're going to get a double game week on the 23rd, in match day 23. So that is the round to load up your team with Viking players, no doubt, and odd players as well, actually, for that matter. So if you're into, it does affect fantasy football quite a lot. And I kind of knew this would happen. I don't think it's going to be the last time this happens. Certainly for the next international break, I could see something similar. A player came back from to Strøm's Godset, Krasniki from Kosovo. He tested positive, and a couple of lads from the Icelandic setup back to Godset as well. They were forced to isolate because someone they were in contact with was positive. So they were just, I mean, these are just bench players at Strøm's Godset, thankfully, and we didn't have any postponement there. But yeah, a real mess. If let's say the way they do it in Norway, it's a lot stricter. You know, they're not happy to keep matches going on if anyone at the club's been affected.
Great stuff. We're going to come back to some listener questions maybe in part 2 if we have time, but we'll wrap it up there for part 1. That was Norway, and we were going to move to Sweden in part 2 and talk about many different talking points. So stay tuned, and we'll be back after this short break.
Welcome back to the Nordic Football Podcast. I'm Steve Wiss, and I'm joined by Jonathan Verdugba, and this is now going to be talking about the Swedish section of the podcast and Allsvenskan. And there was a crazy game. There's only one place to start, really. Malmö away against Djurgården. It ended 3-2 to the Stockholm team, but quite a sensational game of football and a dramatic comeback, I do believe, Jonathan.
Yes, Steve. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I mean, arguably the game of the season in Sweden, you could argue. I mean, can it be a game of the season when there's no fans? Maybe hard to say. But yeah, one of the most thrilling games I've seen in a long, long time in Sweden in terms of outcome. Hard to believe, to be honest. I'm still kind of stunned. I watched the game, and Malmö were cruising for 78 minutes, doing incredibly well, 81 minutes even. Looked to be winning very, very comfortably, went 2-0 up. Ola Toivonen with 2 goals. First goal, a lovely little hit from distance, curled it around the keeper, and the second one was, across from the channel, and he just thumped it home in the penalty area. Looked to be in complete control, but a game that has been described by one of the Malmö players as the theft of the year, and I think that is quite an apt way to put it, because Djurgården have somehow managed to score 3 goals in 8 minutes, to turn it around from a comfortable 2-0 win for Malmö away, looking to seal the titles, zoning in on it, snatching it from Djurgården, of course, don't forget they're the champions, to defeat, snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, basically. And it was the substitutes of Kalle Holmberg came on and scored 2. Kalle Holmberg, or is it Ole Gunnar Holmberg, the super sub, came on and scored 2 goals and turned the game completely on its head. And somehow, Djurgården have won it.
The sheer mention of Ola Toivonen kind of almost puts hairs on the back of my neck, actually. He's been a real journeyman, hasn't he? I've seen him in French football a lot. I think he even had a spell at Sunderland, of all teams. Just looking at his history, it was a Melbourne victory prior to his move to Malmö this year. But a couple of goals there, it looked like the game was done for Malmö. I mean, I can't believe that. That's only their 3rd defeat of the season. They're still in a good spot. I mean, they're 47 points on the board. They're 8 points clear. Although that could be reduced to 5 if Häcken win their game in hand. Although Häcken themselves have dropped points, and we'll talk about that soon. But how did Djurgården manage to come back here? Was it a bit like the sort of the Spurs West Ham game from on Super Sunday yesterday? Where they kind of dodged a load of bullets and then 1 goal, and it just led to this avalanche. I mean, or was there some tactical switches that gave them a chance?
This game all hinged on one thing, and that was the injury to Anders Christiansen, probably the best player in the league, over many years. If you were to sort of look at over a 3-year period or 2-year period, in terms of consistency, you'd say he's the best player in the league for sure. Christiansen, Malmö, stalwart for them. And 78th minute, he had to go off, and he needed 7 stitches in his leg. A challenge came in on him, went off, and this is where the quote of the theft of the century or theft of the year comes in, because he went off. Obviously, there's no fans, so you can't hear much. And he said, "We came here and completely controlled the match, and we led 2-0. I've never played in a match where we've had so much control, and yet we lost 3-2. So picture Christiansen. He's put in a great performance. They're 2-0 up. He's walked off the pitch in an empty stadium, pretty much. Gone to get his stitches in his in the dressing room. And he says, I did not see the end of the match. I was down in the locker room, and the guys came in and said, we lost 3-2. I knew nothing. I was completely shocked. We showed a demonstration of power for 75 minutes, but whoever laughs loudest. And that really is the case. I mean, imagine that you go off and you come back and you've got 9 minutes to go. You're sitting there and you're probably just sitting in the dressing room, kicking your heels, getting your stitches in. And all the players come back in and say, yeah, sorry, mate, we absolutely bottled it. Incredible, really. I mean, 2 of the goals came from corners. Literally within 2 minutes, I was typing the updates on Twitter. And as I was typing the equaliser, they scored another one. Ulvestad, Fredrik Ulvestad powered home a header from a corner. Malmö went to sleep at set pieces. And then, Kalle Holmberg came on, and like I say, he scored one. It was a sort of ball in the box, and he pounced on it. And then scored another one late on. So, it really did throw it away, Malmö, you have to say. And I think they probably a bit of complacency came in. It's one of those games, isn't it? Like you just said, the West Ham game. Sometimes you get these moments in football where it's just the game's never won, isn't it? And there's been a lot of comments about motivation. Without fans, is it harder to keep the motivation and the concentration for a full 90 minutes? I saw Jose Mourinho say some really interesting comments about the difficulty of keeping players motivated without fans for the full 90, and maybe that's contributed to this kind of these late comebacks that we see, or these turnarounds. But it really was just crazy how they turned it around, just especially because they had so much control of the match. It just looked like I nearly turned it off at 2-0 because I thought, well, this is there's no point watching, this is over. I would have been jumping out my seat if I'd have turned it off and come back and seen it was 3-2. I would not have believed it. I'd have thought I was going blind or something. So yeah, it was a really crazy game.
Yeah, 7 stitches in his leg. Is that where Jordan Pickford's been hiding away since doing the job on Van Dijk? But I mean, it shouldn't cost them, should it, Malmö? I mean, they're still well positioned. Häcken have dropped points and 0-0 against Helsingborg, which they can't really afford to be doing if they want to win a title. It doesn't look like the chasing pack is doing enough. I mean, Djurgården, are they out of the race? I mean, they've got a game in hand as well. I mean, could they mount a late charge, or is this sort of the kick up the arse that Malmö might just need to get them over the line?
Yeah, I think it probably will be that sort of kick up the backside. I can't see them. They're 8 points clear. Häcken have got a game in hand in third, so we'll talk about them in a minute. Could reduce that to 5 points, but personally, as good as Häcken have had a season, I don't think they've got the consistency to win pretty much nearly every game. We've got 6 games left. I think it's a big gap. Malmö, obviously they had the Europa League disappointment, and that was the setback for them. But I think they have been the best side, and I think I agree with what Mohamed Said said last week on the exclusive interview when he described Malmö as the best team in Sweden by some way. He just said they've got an answer to every problem, and at 2-0 you thought they did have an answer to every problem, but in this one there's a new problem, new conundrum for them. But credit to Jon Dahl Tomasson, because he's come out afterwards and said we played a perfect game until Christensen's gone off, and he's described it as unacceptable. He said you cannot win against Djurgården if you give away goals like this. This is completely unacceptable. Football can be difficult at times, but we'll move on. And I think, in fairness to him, in pre-season, in the pre-season podcast, I was worried about how he would deal with it. I was a bit concerned about his managerial history. Was he really ready for this sort of big job? Malmö needing to win the league. Of course, we'll never know in terms of the pressure of fans, because this has been a season with no fans. So we'll never really know, obviously, how he could react to maybe moments of pressure in games, maybe with that fan pressure. It's a lot easier to coach, I think, for managers in an empty stadium. It's a lot. I think it takes a lot of the heat off, and it's a lot easier to get your message across. But you have to give credit to him. I think he's really sort of molded this team into a top team, and they look like they're set to now win that title back after a good few seasons now without it. So they're closing in on it. They've got a few games coming up. They've got EFK Helsingborg, which is obviously a big derby. And then Sirius, but they're closing in on it, to be fair. Yeah,
like I said, they're well clear. It's looking good. Let's move on to something else. And there was we had a player in focus on Isaac Bergman Johannesson recently. Well, probably I say recently. It was about more like a couple of months ago, wasn't it? But it's amazing on this podcast how many times we flag up good young talents or players to watch, and just a few months later, or even a few weeks later, they're off on their bike to a big transfer away. And Manchester United of the latest side linked with scouting this hot young talent. He's really catching the eye still, isn't he?
He is, and Manchester United have sent scouts to watch him against Varberg boys. Norrköping obviously won. Jonathan Levy scored a hat-trick in this match, so maybe they'll come back with the good reports about Jonathan Levy. Listen, Steve, we had a long chat about Manchester United, didn't we, recently? And anyone who knows me knows that I've had a lot to say about them of late. I'm not exactly content.
Scout.
Sorry? Did
they send the bold scout, as I like to call him?
I've no idea who they sent, but it's just a report that's come out. Who knows? It's stated that they went to watch him. The manager Jens Gustafsson's come out and said that he doesn't know anything about it and he's not sure. So he sort of played it down. And as we know, Steve, kind of through football in general, a scout going to a game doesn't really mean anything in this day and age, especially when it's Manchester United, seemingly, because you'll remember a few weeks ago, or about 3 or 4 weeks ago, on our podcast we talked about Jens Petter Hauge being watched by Manchester United, and they didn't do much there. So. Yeah, but I think it really speaks to the potential of Isaac Bergman Johannesson, I think, more than anything. I did talk about him, as a player in focus, wasn't he, some while ago in a previous episode. So, and I think he was in my 10 to watch as well. So, my 10 to watch has been pretty good this season. I've had quite a high success rate. And as you do say, we do have a lot of scouts and people following us these days, don't we, and listening and, getting in touch with us. So, yeah, it's just another one. I mean, Juventus, I think, will probably be a more credible link. They've been following Bergman Henderson quite closely this season. And if I was to, if you were to ask me if I think he'll go to United or Juventus, I would definitely say the old lady. United, I think their recruitment is a bit scatty. But yeah, it's an interesting one. Bergman Henderson's been fantastic this season. The amount of goals and assists he's contributed for a 17-year-old is just exceptional. I think he is worthy of the hype. And by the way, I've said it 3 or 4 times on this podcast, he's still eligible for England. So Gareth, if you're listening, get yourself down to Norrköping and have a good long chat with the Bergman Johannesson, because you never know, he could end up playing for England.
I don't think Southgate even knows what his best side is at the minute. I'm not the big fan of him at the moment, personally. But if Bergman Johannesson was to sign for Manchester United as a fan, and knowing what you know about him, would you be happy? Because he's certainly wouldn't be ready to be starting for a big club like that. He's more of a project, isn't he?
He'd be a project, but if he was to sign for Manchester United and go into their under-23s, in my opinion, he'd be one of the top players.
Right.
I know a lot about Manchester United at all levels, and I've seen their 23s quite regularly. I watched them get absolutely destroyed by Liverpool in a 23s game not too long ago, about a month or so ago. And there are some exciting young talents at Manchester United, and there have been some players signed in this past window that are young. Obviously, Amad Traore and a young Uruguayan lad. They won't be ready for the first team, but they could integrate into the 23s. Isaac Bergman Johannesson will come into the under 23s at United and probably dominate it. I think from his point of view, you look at it, and I don't know if he'd want to move to United because he's getting regular first team football. I don't think he needs a 23. You can stall your development by going into a 23 setup.
Yeah.
You can argue there's more to learn playing week in, week out for a top Allsvenskan side than playing under 23s football. Although there's no fans in either of the stadiums, so it doesn't make a difference from that point of view, does it? But he's actually commented about the rumours. He said, I don't really think much about it. It's fun when big clubs look at me and think I'm a good player, but my focus is on Norrköping. I'll tell you one thing, Steve. This kid is very driven and determined, and I think one thing I could say about him, he's got a very clear picture from everything I've read and all the comments I've seen from him. He's got a very clear picture of where he sees his career going. He said already he wants to play abroad one day, but he seems to be like a player who will set clear goals and will know when it's time to leave. And I think he'll know what club it is time to leave for as well. He seems very mature. I've said it before. Players at the club have commented how mature he is and what a level head he has for such a young player. So I don't think he'll be mugged off. I don't think he'll be fooled by anyone. And if we look at it from Norrköping's point of view, they've made some high-profile sales of late. Rasmus Larsson's gone for a good sort of 1.6 million. They've just sold Pontus Almqvist. We'll talk about him in a minute to Russia. So they've got good money in the coffers as well. And long term, that's going to be a really important thing for Norrköping. They're getting in quite a lot of money at the moment. So yeah, it's good for Bergman Johannesson. It just tells you that we know what we're talking about because we talked about him for a while now. And for clubs like Manchester United to be looking at him, Juventus to be looking at him, shows you that this is a real talent.
And if United got him, I think they should loan him to somewhere like Preston. That worked out before for someone, doesn't it? So
I think Burnley, like his dad, maybe. His dad played for Burnley, so
toughen them up in one of these tough Lancashire towns and with the making of him. But you talked about some transfers out of the league, and I know you want to talk about 2 in particular, so take that away.
Yeah, well, I just mentioned one of them, Pontus Almqvist. He's gone from Norrköping to Rostov, and he's also joined by Armin Djurgården. So, two big transfers there, actually. One was another of my 10 to watch. I'm doing a lot of bragging at the moment, but, when you get it right, Steve, you get it right. So, Djurgården, he was in my 10 to watch this season on the pre-season Allsvenskan podcast, which you can go back and listen to on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts if you want to listen back to that. Don't listen to the part where I predict who wins the league. Just listen to the players, because that's what I'm good at. But he's on the move, and they're both off to Russia.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, the Russian league, you do get some go there, don't you? But yeah, another of those talents in that tender watch list that are on moving away. It's remarkable. It happens year after year. And let's just, before we finish, move on to some listener questions. Bottom of the table.
Well, we haven't talked about Auschwitz yet. You're cutting off half the.
Oh, of course.
You're cutting off half the conversation there.
There we go. Well, I got a bit excited there.
You're excited, aren't you?
I had Kalmar in my head.
Just because you had 40 minutes, you're trying to rush me.
I had Kalmar in my head, so.
No, on Djurgården, and obviously I want to talk about Almqvist because he's obviously leaving the league and he's one that I really like. Djurgården, obviously he's 18 years old. He was linked with Arsenal and Manchester City. I don't think he's had an amazing season. And on my Y Scout blog, it was about 3 months ago, I think, he was one of my talents that I highlighted on and did an analysis of. And I did actually mention in that article, I said I'd like to see him stay for a full season and maybe longer because I thought his form had dipped a bit and I felt like he needs some time. But yeah, his time has come. He's played 20 league games and scored 1 goal. He's not been incredible. His pass completion has been very good, but I think he's kind of leveled off a bit in a tough season for Helsingborg. They've struggled with injuries. They're down there near the bottom. They're struggling for their survival, and for an 18-year-old, that's always difficult. And ultimately, this is one of those ones where they can't turn the money down. The deal is one of the biggest in the club's history. It's rumored to be expressed and reported at being 30 million Swedish crowns, which is about 2.6 million pounds, which is a huge amount of money for Allsvenskan. He joined them as a 15-year-old from Landskrona Boys, the team that if anyone remembers my Football Manager save from the lockdown, they're my mortal enemies, Landskrona Boys. But he joined from them as a 15-year-old and has developed really well. I think he's got a good future. I compared him to Samir Nasri or Kevin De Bruyne type player. The way he threads passes, he's a really good progressive passer. He's good at linking play. I think he's got a good future ahead of him. I hope Rostov look after him because it's a bit of a, they're 7th in the Russian league. It's a bit of a strange destination, but good luck to him. And I think he felt maybe it was time for him to leave as well.
Yeah, definitely. And are we ready to move on to the bottom of the table talk now? Then?
Well, no, because you haven't asked me about Pontus Almqvist. Are you hating on this guy or something?
Pontus Almqvist, and what is the...
So it's a double deal. It's a double deal, and I definitely want to talk about Almqvist purely because I think he's a very exciting. I'm sad to see him go, and if I'm not going to be able to talk about him again on this podcast, then I definitely going to pick you up on it, Steve, because he's a 21-year-old and he scored some quality goals this season. He scored a brilliant goal against IFK Göteborg. He can score on his left foot, his right foot, headers. Takes goals really well. He times his runs really well. There's one goal this season that I remember against IFK where Bergman Johannesson, which we just talked about, picks up the ball in the middle of the park on the counter attack sort of thing. They pick up possession, Norrköping. He threads a pass in behind. Almqvist makes a brilliant run, picks it up, takes one touch, and then buries it. And that was when they beat IFK away in Gothenburg. And Almqvist, he's a 21-year-old sort of blonde kid. He's got kind of that kind of swagger about him. Nice sort of change of pace. Really impressive finisher. His expected goals per 90 is one of the best in Allsvenskan, actually. Despite sort of, he's only just come into the team. He's not been a huge regular because obviously they've got Christopher Niemann, they've got Haksabanovic, they've got a lot of other players. But I think maybe that's part of the reason they might have just decided to sell him because, again, it's one of their biggest ever sales, 35 million SEK, which is about £3 million. So they said they couldn't turn the offer down. And he said, I want to thank all the supporters and everything. And he's off to Russia to join Djurgården. So, be one to keep an eye on. And Jens Gustafsson came out and said, Pontus has had a fantastic time with us. He's worked very hard to handle the physical conditions of this club and playing as an elite football player. And we've been able to guide him. We're extremely proud of his development. And we're happy to once again be able to be proud that another player from Norrköping can achieve his dreams. Now, just to tell you, Steve, they've also signed Dennis Hadzikadunic, who used to play in Sweden as well, Rostov. So they're clearly looking at Swedish talents and youngsters. But I have to say, Almqvist is an exciting player, and I'm going to miss both of them, Djurgården and Almqvist, to be honest. And finally, just before wrapping up that section, I just want to say this could be a game changer for the league in the long term, because what we've just seen happen now this season, we've just seen Norrköping bring in about £5 million. Now, we talked about the budgets of Malmö and, the budgets of all the other Allsvenskan teams and how big Europe is. That covers their budget for like a season pretty much. And that is huge with no fans in the stadium. So I think Norrköping, what they've done here, they're just skimming off some of the players. Like Lauritsen was a top defender. We talked about him a couple of weeks ago. They've just skimmed off a couple of their players to let go and, prepare for next season, if that makes sense. Because obviously the financial crisis is going to hit a lot of teams. They're well positioned now to maybe next season go for it, and maybe they can use that money, reinvest it. They've still got a lot of young talents and good players in that squad. So if you think about if they're going to get more money for Bergman and Johannesson as well, this could be a period of time where Norrköping are just banking in a lot of money to go for it maybe next season.
That is a very good point. And I always think that selling Erling Braut Haaland kind of set the wheel rolling again for Molde, if you know what I mean. Always were a decent club financially anyway, but sometimes an impetus like that, long term, they could be well set and maybe celebrating a championship within the next 2 or 3 years if they get the right sort of deals right. But
I think they'll come out of it very well. I think this is quite clever, actually. They're second, they're 8 points behind. With 6 games to go, they're probably not going to win the league. But if you look at it, and also Haksabanovic has recently been linked with a move. He only just signed for them at the beginning of the season. They paid a lot of money to bring him back from West Ham. But I think they've got one eye on the long term there. I think they know they're going to sell him as soon as they can. So, this could be a sort of, like you just said there, kind of a Brentford, Midtjylland, a kind of Moneyball type thing, where they're just selling off a lot of their young talents just to reinvest into the squad. And just, there's a potential gap there for a club. The likes of AIK, the likes of EF Core, the likes of, Hammarby, they don't have as much money coming in. So this could be a long-term play for Norrköping that could reap dividends in the coming season.
And I'm very, very sorry to hear that 2 of your favourite players have moved to the Russian league, Jonathan. Maybe you'll have to have an FM21 save in the Russian league or something along those lines, just to soften the blow as such. It's gutting, isn't it? When I've been the same in Norway, where some players that you really get attached to and you love them, you just go, they're transferred out, and you kind of, I tend to lose touch of a lot of these players, sadly. But
well, I'm glad you at least let me talk about them. You were about to move on about 10 minutes ago.
I was indeed, and now I'm going to move on. And basically, my question is, for Kalmar fans, do you have any positive words, or is it too late for them?
Well, you can never write off Kalmar, can you? But unfortunately, they're 6 points off it now. They're 5 points behind EFK in safety. They're joint with Falkenberg, who got a win recently, which, Falkenberg, I thought they were doomed, but they've just given themselves a bit of a lifeline with a win against Örebro. 2-1 win, a huge win that is for them, because otherwise they were looking completely dead. I worry about Kalmar. They got the worst defensive record in the league, 44 goals conceded in 24 games. They've got the worst goal difference in the league, minus 18. They've scored 26 goals, which isn't too bad. If you compare it, even they've scored more than Östersunds, they've scored more than AIK, in fairness. The bottom 4 have all scored the same number of goals: EFK, Helsingborg, Falkenberg, and Kalmar. But they just lose too many games. I really worry about Kalmar, and I remember the words of their chairman in pre-season saying this season is just all about survival. He called it. Kalmar usually have higher ambitions than that, but he sort of it was a bit of a harbinger of doom, so to speak, because I wrote down his comments. He said this year is just all about staying up, and that did just stick in my mind a little bit, and it's looking like it might not happen for them.
You know who I am worrying for, and that is Varberg. They've lost 4 of their last 5 games. I've just looked at their fixture list, and near enough all their remaining matches are against sides in the top half of the table. I think they could be the side that gets sucked into danger. But is there also a danger for EF Core? Again, we seem to have this conversation most podcasts, actually. They get a victory and then they kind of lose one. They're still hovering right above danger. I mean, which of those two sides would be more likely to be relegated, do you think?
Yeah, and you make a very astute point there, Steve, because if you remember last season, it was GIF. There's always one team who seems to just suddenly get sucked into it. And last season, it was GIF Sundsvall, and they got sucked in and buried when Falkenberg had that incredible escape. And then obviously Kalmar leapfrogged them as well and took the relegation playoff. And GIF Sundsvall, they went through a period of time where they won 2 in a row. They beat Kalmar away, and everyone thought, well, they're safe. And then they beat Sirius as well. They drew with Norrköping, and then they lost 3 in a row and got relegated. So I think it's very astute to point out Varberg. The last time I talked about Varberg on this podcast, I mentioned how much I quite like what they're doing. But they have, sometimes you get a team who just, they sort of get to a point where they think they're safe, don't they? And they kind of switch off. They've not won in 5 games now. Lost to Norrköping at the weekend. We just mentioned that with the Manchester United scouts watching them. Lost at EFK as well, which is key. They drew with Kalmar. Lost to Helsingborg as well. They lost to Falkenberg, who were down there. So I think it's an astute point. And they have got tough games, like you say, Elfsborg and AIK and Hammarby the next 3 games. But yeah, on the subject of the other teams, I said it before. AIK have managed to get out of it now. Had a bit of a decent run of form. Their signings, I think, have sort of turned it around. The new manager, Bartosz Gryzlak, has managed to get some sort of rhythm for them. They're now pretty much clear of it. They're 10th. EF, of course, still struggling. But I just think there's 3 worse teams than them. I think Helsingborg got a good 0-0 draw against Häcken today. But they had 3 more injuries. And injuries have just been the story of their season, to be honest. One of the other keys of their season has been Anthony van den Herk, who, I wrote that, I made a video report on in pre-season. He's actually smashed the goal target that I gave him. I said he'd get 8 to 10 goals. He's beaten that. He's really come good in the last few weeks and sort of proved himself. You can go on Just Football YouTube to watch that video if you want. But I just think Helsingborg, Falkenberg and Kalmar are kind of, I think those will be the bottom 3, if I'm honest. Maybe Varberg get sucked into it. Maybe Helsingborg get out of it. But the worry with Helsingborg is just that injury record. They keep losing players to injury. Anders Lindegaard came back recently. They had a player come on today after 3-4 months out and got injured and went off after 60 minutes. After half an hour, sorry. They're picking up too many injuries.
I would be honestly surprised looking at the fixture. I don't think Varberg will score more than 30 points. So it's a question of whether someone in that bottom 3 can get up to that mark. So, and they may well not. So it'd be interesting to follow this relegation battle. Falkenberg have just had a win as well. They're not dead and buried yet. It's always funny, this battle down here. Teams come from nowhere to survive, and teams often get sucked in from nowhere. So all eyes on that bottom end of the table. Let's, before we finish the episode, move on to some listener questions. What have the people been throwing at us this week, Jonathan?
Yeah, well, we've had a few. I mean, just before we do move on, you mentioned, you just talked about teams getting sucked into it. Well, funnily enough, the team with the lowest XG in the league is Östersund. But they've really been really doing well. They beat Sirius, who were the star of our show last week. They beat them this week 3-2. I have to say I've been quite impressed with the Östersund in terms of how they've turned it around, because I really did think they'd go down. But if you're looking at it, Varberg are quite comfortable. They've got 32 XG to their 33 scored, which is way above Helsingborg's, Falkenberg's, well, just above it, and Kalmar's. But it's a good point. And EFK have got 34 XG, but only 26 scored. So maybe they're going to need, maybe they need a striker in the winter. But yeah, we've had a few questions. And the first one we're going to address this week is from our good friend and loyal supporter, who is here for football. And he says, Bodø Glimt has pretty much got the title in the bag. Is there anything that we're keen to keep an eye on as the season winds down? Is there anything in Norway, Steve, that you've got your eye on towards the end of the season?
The race for the silver and bronze positions is going to be close, and I think the relegation battle, actually, I've got a sneaking suspicion it's going to get quite intense. What I'm really interested in is how certain teams finish this season and start to set themselves up for 2021. It's going to be a really intriguing year going forward. I think positioning themselves for the future. Like I kind of mentioned this earlier with Rosenborg a little bit, didn't I? But there's always plenty to keep an eye on.
Yeah, good stuff there is. And I think, for me, I mean, the title race isn't done yet, so we still got a bit to go. And yeah, I'm interested in who's going to stay up. I just wonder if EFK can get sucked into it. I saw someone create a fake Twitter account and with the Super Etten logo. And when EFK lost their most recent game, they tweeted at EFK saying, see you next season. But that got a bit of traction. But yeah, how that pans out will be interesting to see. And yeah, who else, what other players might leave, or what other players are going to sort of turn it on and, maybe attract other clubs is always something that I like to keep an eye on. So thanks a lot for that question. The next question we had was from Ted Cruz, my son. And it's another question on Norway. Is this the best chance a Norwegian team has got to going into the group stages in recent years? I'm liking Molde's chances.
Yes, is the answer. He likes a straight answer, does Ted? So yes. There
you go. Yes, indeed. And the next question is from, we've got two more. One is from Phil at Kirk Magic. He says, who are the players to watch for the teams in Europe? So have you got maybe one or two players to watch? Because we don't have any Swedish teams in Europe.
Yeah, Magnus Wolf Eikram definitely is the key player to watch out for Molde. But I would say if Ola Brynhildsen is given enough time to shine on the stage, he could be a winger there who could attract the attention. He's got a bit of a flair and X factor to him, who may well catch the eye for Molde. But definitely Magnus Wolf Eikram is the main man.
Great stuff. And then one final question, which was for me, and that is from La Bitacora del FPL, who is a Spanish account, I guess. And he has asked, who is going to be Allsvenskan top scorer in your opinion and top assist provider too? Very good question, and thanks a lot for listening to the show as always, La Bitacora. I'm going to say Isak Kiese Tellin. I think he's got 11 goals. The top scorer at present is Christopher Niemann of Norrköping with 12. And then you've got Jesper Karlsson, who's obviously left now the league, gone to the Netherlands at AZ Alkmaar. You've got Kiese Tellin, and then you've got Stefano Vecchia on 11. I think Vecchia's had a really good season, by the way, and obviously Mohamed Saeed said he's the best player in Allsvenskan, which was quite controversial, I thought, but an interesting point. But I think Kiese Tellin will take it. I think he's been really, really good for them, Malmö, this season. I think he just added that sort of guaranteed goals that they needed. I think Rosenborg was coming to the end of his time last season, and I think they lacked that kind of clinical goal scorer. Kiese Tellin scores goals. I think he'll end up top scorer. And top assist provider currently is Gustav Ludvigsson of Hammarby. And Bergman Hansen, by the way, has 7, which for a 17-year-old is joint second top scorer, assist provider, which is incredible. I'm going to go for a bit of an outside bet on this one, and I'm going to say I'm going to give some love to Syria. So I'm going to say I think either Yukiya Sugita, who currently has 6. For Sirius, he's been incredible this season. Really lovely player, really nice dribbler. Sirius remind me a bit of that kind of Mane, Salah, Firmino up front. To be honest, the way they play and the way that Sugita and Vecchia kind of get through the flanks, they pick up the ball in wide areas and sort of cut inside and hit one. Got a real good relationship as well. Those 3. Obviously, Mohamed Saeed talked about it on the last show, so go back and listen to that. But I'm going to just say maybe he might sort of pick up 3 or 4 more assists and sneak it. That's just a bit of an outside tip.
Interesting stuff. And I think that's pretty much about it for this episode. I don't know if there's anything else we've got to talk about before we wrap up, but good show, my friend.
Yeah, good show. Always good to have a chat with you about football, my man. I just want to give one last shout out before we leave. Thank you to all our Patreon subscribers, and thank you to all our listeners, of course. Hope you enjoyed the exclusive interview. It went out on Patreon exclusively as a bonus content. So I hope you enjoyed that, and obviously anyone else who listened to it as well. Do hit us up if you're interested in getting us a bit more carrot cake per month. Patreon.com/Nordic Football Podcast. And if you did hear me munching on it, by the way, that was a really good carrot cake. I'm not going to lie. But yeah, if you do want to sort of treat us, you can kind of sponsor us from $3 a month, $3-4 a month, which is nothing really. Is it's a price of it's like half a cup of tea between us. So if you do enjoy the show and you do think you're getting value from it, then feel free. We'd be very welcome to have you follow us on Patreon. We're going to be putting some extra bonus content on there in the coming weeks as well, as we mentioned. And to the people who do currently back us on Patreon, thank you very much as always, and we really appreciate it. And obviously, if you're new to the show, follow us on Twitter at Nordic Football and subscribe. Go on iTunes, leave a review, tell everyone how much you love us, or if you hate us, then I suppose you can tell everyone how much you hate us. But I'd rather you told everyone how much you love us. If you did enjoy the show, and that just helps us spread the word and get the listener numbers up. So that's about all I have to say for this episode.
Yeah, enjoyed it, mate. And we'll be back again very soon. Thanks for listening. Take care. Stay safe. And goodbye. See you next time.
And just before we go, tune in next week, as we will have another special guest. So hope you look forward to that. But yeah, as well from me, Twitter at JF Football and Twitter at Meatyman Soccer for Steve Wiss. Cheers for listening and goodbye.